Good evening, my friends, and welcome to My Dark Path. Prepare yourselves for a gripping historical journey, a case where UFO sightings, celebrity encounters, cunning hoaxers, relentless ufologists, and the ruthless CIA converge into one tangled, unforgettable narrative. I've been pursuing this story for some time, but its completion hinged on a single, obscure piece of evidence that I finally encountered. A 1955 article from the Journal of Spaceflight that's been locked away from the public. And with the aid of a brilliant researcher, we've uncovered that gem, allowing me to bring you this tale in full. Does it provide conclusive evidence of extraterrestrials? The choice is yours. Yet, whatever you conclude, there is one undeniable fact that stands tall. The government cannot be trusted. On August 23, 1954, the technology magazine Aviation Week and Space Technology released a story that stirred the American population. And it also angered Pentagon officials who were trying to keep the story secret. The short, one-paragraph article in the Washington Roundup section stated,
Pentagon scare over the observance of two previously unobserved satellites orbiting the Earth has dissipated with identifying the objects as natural, not artificial satellites. Dr. Lincoln La Paz, an expert on extraterrestrial bodies from the University of New Mexico, headed the identification project. One satellite is orbiting about 400 miles out, while the other is 600 miles from the Earth. Pentagon thought momentarily the Russians had beaten the U.S. to space exploration.
The next day, the New York Times, drawing from Aviation Week, reported on two mysterious objects orbiting Earth. And the story swept the nation within days, with many rejecting the official claim that they were natural asteroids. Earth capturing two at once seemed far too unlikely. While researchers in the government raced to decode the objects, opportunists pounced, exploiting the public's fear and growing obsession with UFOs to peddle their own agendas. In 1954, two sisters captured what they swore was an alien transmission, a tale that might have been dismissed or forgotten had the CIA not worked to bury it. A 1997 CIA report later hinted at the truth, but brushed off the recording and blamed the cover-up on rogue officers. But I'm not convinced that their excuses hold water. Hi, I'm MF Thomas, and welcome to My Dark Path, where I explore the obscure corners of history, conspiracies, and the unexplained. The idea that satellites were orbiting Earth in 1954, 3 years before the Soviets launched the first artificial satellite, startled the American public and government. For all the anxiety this news generated at the time, I found no definitive technical explanation about their origin or fate. Hypotheses suggest the objects were either natural asteroids temporarily captured by Earth's gravity or simply false radar signals. But whatever the truth, the orbiting objects were very real in the public's mind in 1954. Their discovery reinforced the paranoia of the time as Cold War fears mixed with unresolved UFO sightings. And it also drew out charlatans eager to exploit the public's fascination with alien visitors. Richard Miller was one such man. Born on July 2, 1930, his early years coincided with the Great Depression and World War II. While I found no specifics about his birthplace, family background, or education, it's clear Miller gained strong technical skills in electronics and radio communications during his U.S. Air Force service. However, Miller's time in the Air Force wasn't without incident. Years later, his mother-in-law, Mrs. Quinnell of Detroit, told a newspaper that Miller, quote, had some troubles about some radio equipment, end quote, but he still received an honorable discharge. The exact nature of this trouble remains unclear. Perhaps he was caught with stolen Air Force radio equipment. After his military service, Miller returned to Detroit and began selling cars for an auto dealer named Randall Cox. But his true passion lay elsewhere, in the study of UFOs. It's unclear what sparked Miller's obsession with alien contact, but by 1954, at age 24, he made his first attempt to communicate with extraterrestrials. Now, this wasn't a private endeavor Miller pursued in secret. Instead, he was remarkably public about his efforts and convinced his boss, Randall Cox, and several others in a local UFO group that he had discovered something extraordinary. As you'll see, Miller's compelling personality must have played a role in selling this extraordinary story. Miller claimed that he was in communication with an alien ship in orbit around Earth, and even more provocatively, that the aliens would speak to him and anyone else he invited. Now, that's a bold assertion, especially to share with your boss and peers, yet Miller's credibility as a radio and communications expert, combined with the era's fascination with UFOs, made his story plausible. Just 2 years earlier, in July of 1952, the nation had been gripped by UFO sightings over Washington, D.C. Multiple unidentified objects were detected near the White House and the U.S. Capitol, with civilian and military witnesses reporting high-speed maneuvers that outpaced scrambled fighter jets. The incident made headlines worldwide, fueling public and government concern. And now, with the world abuzz over two mysterious objects orbiting Earth, Miller's boss and friends were primed to believe him, or at least not dismiss him outright. So they agreed to join him in an attempt to contact the aliens via radio. On an unspecified date in 1954, the group arrived by car at a location outside the city as directed by Miller. They parked, perhaps wondering if they were about to witness something incredible or fall victim to an elaborate prank. Miller turned on the car radio to a static-filled station, then announced that he needed to leave to signal the aliens. He walked out of sight over a nearby hill. As dusk turned to night, Cox and the others began to suspect they'd been fooled. But then, suddenly, the radio crackled to life, replacing the static with an odd yet understandable voice speaking in English. Though the exact words are lost to time, Randall Cox later shared the gist of the message with a newspaper reporter. The voice claimed to be an alien aboard a spaceship orbiting Earth. It boasted of advanced technology, including the ability to observe the group from afar as they listened. Then suddenly, as it began, the transmission ended and the radio returned to static. The group sat in stunned silence until Miller returned from over the hill. It's unclear if they noticed Miller had been absent during the entire message. Despite their desire to believe, though, the event strained credulity. Cox grew suspicious and later confronted a radio operator who turned out to have helped Miller, who then revealed the truth. The truth then emerged. Miller had set up a shortwave transmitter in an abandoned truck a half a mile from the car. As Cox later told a reporter, it was using this technology that Miller had, quote, cut in on our car radio with his phony message from the spaceship, end quote. It was, in Cox's words, hogwash. Although I found no records to the contrary, it's safe to assume that this hoax probably ended Miller's career in the auto industry. He went silent for a year or two before resurfacing in California with an even more audacious tale of alien communication. But that is a story for another day. For now, let's return to this broader frenzy that surrounded these mysterious satellites, even if they weren't communicating with Richard Miller. In August of 1954, Aviation Week and Space Technology dropped a bombshell. Unidentified objects were orbiting Earth, and the Pentagon was racing to figure out what they were. The story didn't start there, though. Earlier that year, the U.S. Army had tapped Clyde Tombaugh, the astronomer who discovered Pluto, to search for near-Earth asteroids, possible stepping stones for future space exploration. His mission was public, but the findings shrouded in uncertainty. Then came Dr. G.M. Clements, a leading astronomer, quoted in the Science newsletter. He argued the odds were very good that small natural satellites orbited between Earth and the Moon, and that they were ideal candidates for space platforms, if only they could be identified. But the plot thickened in May of 1954 when Donald Keyhoe, a respected naval aviator and co-founder of NICAP, hit the airwaves with a wild claim. Artificial satellites were up there, and the government was covering it up. He pointed fingers at scientists in White Sands, New Mexico, including Tombaugh, alleging that they were tracking these objects. Tombaugh shot back in Popular Mechanics, insisting the reports were not correct and had nothing to do with flying saucers. But by fall, the public was hooked and confused. Were these objects real, natural, or man-made? And if man-made, who put them there? The US, the Soviets, or someone else entirely? Newspapers and radio shows buzzed with theories as the government scrambled to downplay the panic. But the official line unraveled when General Nathan F. Twining, Air Force Chief of Staff, admitted that while 90% of UFO reports were pure imagination, 10% baffled even the experts. "We just don't know about that 10%, he said, a rare crack in the military's armor that only fueled the fire. With questions piling up and trust in the government fraying, the mystery of these satellites took on a life of its own, priming the scene for two unlikely sisters to step into the shadows of the unknown. In late 1954, radio host Jim Mills, a well-known broadcaster and UFO enthusiast, decided to conduct an experiment, convinced that the mysterious objects orbiting Earth were alien satellites. On November 28th of that year at Chicago's WGN radio station, he welcomed UFO researcher John Otto as his guest. Otto was a member of the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, like Richard Miller, whom we met earlier. Otto, though, stood apart from Miller's dubious reputation. He was a genuine researcher captivated by UFOs. Though Otto would later denounce Miller's stunts, that night he and Mills shared a daring vision. They wanted to contact the orbiting satellites. The idea was irresistible, so they crafted a secret plan, unveiling it only when the time was right. At exactly 11:15 during the live broadcast, Mills dropped a bombshell. They would send a signal to the satellites and invite the aliens to reply directly to WGN's audience. In 10 minutes, they said, at 11:25, they'd issue the prompt, "Come in, outer space," to summon the response. Mills noted that the short notice, just 10 minutes, was very intentional. It was designed to stop pranksters from using radio equipment to fake a signal. Mills outlined the next step. After they said the prompt, he'd silence the studio microphones for 15 seconds, but keeping WGN's signal live. The aliens, they hoped, would hijack the transmitter and beam their message to Chicago's listeners. He urged the audience to grab tape recorders and prepare for the alien transmission. And so, at 11:25, near the end of the show, Mills spoke the words, "Come in, outer space," and then cut off the microphones. He and Otto tuned in to a studio radio, eager for a reply. But after 15 seconds of silence, they heard nothing. With the show ending at the half-hour mark, they signed off, disheartened by the apparent failure, or so it seemed. Then, the phones at WGN began to ring. 4 listeners within the station's range insisted they'd heard the alien message. Decades later, declassified CIA files revealed that 5 Chicago ham radio operators also claimed to have recorded it, and a Wisconsin listener reported taping the signal too, although his recording vanished. Among the callers were sisters Marie and Mildred Maier, who lived just north of the studio. They were livid, certain the UFO stunt was a hoax. Following Mills and Otto's advice, they'd recorded the 15-second window of sound, but instead of silence, their tape had picked up strange tones that sounded eerily like Jingle Bells. Though furious at the supposed trick, Marie and Mildred weren't easily fooled. They'd spent a decade in advertising as the original Doublemint Twins, famed for pitching chewing gum. Their media savvy fueled their skepticism, but what they'd captured hinted at a mystery beyond any marketing ploy. William Wrigley Jr., the inventor of Doublemint chewing gum, was born on September 30th, 1861 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He grew up in a modest entrepreneurial family. His father ran a small soap business where young William learned sales by helping sell soap door to door. His mother managed their household and educated their children. At age 11, William Jr. began selling newspapers, a common job for boys at the time. To stand out, he bundled his papers with small extras like candy or trinkets to attract more customers. By age 13, he'd left school to work as a soap salesman for his father's company, honing the sales skills that would shape his future. At age 29, with just $32 and a bold vision, he moved to Chicago to start his own business. He first sold soap, offering baking powder as a promotional incentive, but when customers showed more interest in the baking powder, he pivoted to selling that, bundling chewing gum as a freebie. And history repeated. Customers actually preferred the gum, leading Wrigley to focus solely on it by 1893. And in 1914, Wrigley launched Doublemint gum, named for its unique selling point, a double dose of peppermint flavor that was stronger and longer lasting than rivals. He poured money into advertising, starting with billboards and newspapers, then expanding to radio and TV. In 1939, the company introduced the Doublemint Twins, first as stylized drawings in magazines and newspapers, but then later moving to live models. And that, my friends, brings us to the Maier sisters, Marie and Mildred from Silver Hill, Alabama, who became the first real-life Doublemint twins. Growing up, the sisters milked the family cows each morning before catching the bus to school. Marie, the elder one, taught Mildred to sing in harmony while they were doing chores, and soon they were performing at local events. Their father, a founder of the Robertsdale Hub Truckers Cooperative, later sent Marie to Chicago to market the cooperative's potatoes. Her confidence and charm made her a top seller. During one such trip, she saw a vaudeville show and was instantly captivated by the stage. Back home, Marie persuaded Mildred, then a student at high school, to join her in auditioning for a top vaudeville producer. They landed the gig, performing with the act, Pete and Piddle. Audiences loved their blend of singing, miming, and comedy. Marie even became Miss Tavern Pale Ale, gracing posters and ads, and the sisters' signature look, bright apricot hair and hazel eyes, set them apart. And by the 1930s, the sisters were established entertainers, performing as a musical duo and starring in their own radio program, Women with Wings. And then in 1939, Wrigley chose them as the first Doublemint Twins. Though marketed as twins, the sisters, of course, were born nearly a decade apart, Marie in 1906 and Mildred in 1915. Their mother chaperoned their early tours. Even as Doublemint Twins, they never actually chewed gum, as their mother deemed it unladylike. From 1939 to 1940, they tirelessly promoted the brand on radio. Now, it's unclear when or why the Maier sisters became fascinated by UFOs, but their 1954 recording wasn't their first brush with the subject. As I'll explain, the recording left them so intrigued that they sought out experts to analyze it, including H.B. Ketchum at the Journal of Spaceflight. Now, this wasn't a tabloid, but a respected monthly publication on space exploration published by the Chicago Rocket Society. The article about the sisters detailed their long-standing interest in UFOs, and unfortunately, while it's often cited, there's no transcript available. Even in the CIA's 1997 report, the CIA's role in the study of UFOs, it's mentioned only in passing. My search led me to rare book dealers and to eBay, where I collected nearly every 1955 issue of the journal except February, the one with the Maier article. Finally, with the library science expert's help, I secured a copy of that original article, titled Report of an Interview Concerning the Photography of an Unidentified Flying Object and the Receipt of an Unexplained Radio Code. H.B. Ketchum, the article's author, based his account solely on the interview with the sisters. The article starts out,
Miss Mildred Maier and her sister Marie Maier of 3812 North Ashland Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, have long been interested in photography. Perhaps this interest results from the fact that they have been in the theatrical business for years, including stage, dramatic radio, and television productions, and have posed for commercial photography. Their interest in UFOs is of a more recent nature, although they have read most of the available books on the subject and are aware of material reported by others. This story has to do with 3 different occasions entirely unrelated to each other and happening at different times.
Mildred and Marie's first UFO encounter occurred on June 30th, 1954, when they captured mysterious images during a solar eclipse from their third-floor apartment in Chicago. Using a speed graphic camera equipped with a sunshade and mounted on a tripod, They photographed the eclipse through their living room window. The camera produced 3.5-inch by 4.5-inch images. Upon developing the negative, two faint, round objects appeared on either side of the eclipse in asymmetrical positions, described as ethereal orb-like shapes. One object displayed has a shaded center, suggesting an indented surface. These objects were not visible to the naked eye during the photography session. A commercial photographer reportedly examined the negative and dismissed lens reflections as the cause. In seeking further insight, the sisters sent the photographs along with explanatory letters to National Geographic and Life magazines. Both publications returned the submissions, suggesting they consult a scientist or astronomer. At the Adler Planetarium, a spokesman dismissed the images, stating they showed no evidence of flying saucers, and emphasized that his directive was to debunk such theories. Finally, the sisters even showed their prints to Leslie Desmond, a former RAF flyer and British Air Ministry member, who was a co-author of Flying Saucers Have Landed. Desmond told them that two Norwegian scientists who photographed the same eclipse from 15,000 feet had captured similar objects. And just as their work on that photograph was dying down, months later, the sisters photographed another UFO event on August 21st of 1954. The Baha'i Temple in Willamette stood fully lit, marking the final evening of the World Council of Churches. The dramatic white building caught the attention of Marie and Mildred, and eager for a striking photo, they arrived at the site and at approximately 9:30 p.m. began their work. Using their same speed graphic camera from their first event, they captured two exposures, one lasting a minute and another for 2 minutes. When the negatives were developed, the results startled the sisters. 5 unidentifiable objects appeared on the film, of 2 different types. 2 objects resembled the anomalies from their eclipse photo, while the remaining 3 had elongated teardrop shapes, their pointed ends converging like arrows aimed at a single target. Though positioned asymmetrically, imaginary lines through their tips would meet at one point. And despite my searches, I've been unable to locate these photos. Remarkably, none of these objects had been visible to the sisters during their photography session. Though skeptics might attribute these events to lens flares, they did lead the sisters to tune in to the Mills show on November 28th. That evening, Mills and John Otto recounted multiple UFO events from that year, but little did the sisters know this was just the beginning of their journey into the unknown. After they'd made their recording, the Maier sisters called in to WGN to complain, and the station recorded their contact information. Within days, Otto reached out to them, assuring them over the phone that the time slot was indeed left open and that no music like Jingle Bells had been played. He then arranged a meeting to hear their account firsthand and obtained a copy of their recording. And the recording from the Journal of Spaceflight article was described as follows.
It sounded like a code being keyed at extremely fast speed, possibly machine keyed. The recording was slowed down to about 1/8 speed, and it is reported that the code then sounded like weird musical tones belonging to a scale not associated with the familiar tempered scale of tones used in music.
Otto shared the recording on various radio shows, including his own, Out of This World, on WGN. Listeners who heard it described it as resembling Jingle Bells overlaid with an eerie, telex-like hum. Unfortunately, no audio of the recording survives today, at least that I've found. And the story could have faded into obscurity, just another one of those 10% of the cases that General Twining deemed unexplainable, odd but unresolved. Given their determination of finding the truth about their UFO photos, Marie and Mildred actually refused to let this story die. They shared their experience with UFO groups and even the Journal of Spaceflight, which described it in the following way. Quote, "The last event occurred on November 28, 1954 at 11:25 a.m. The Maier sisters were wire recording the Jim Mills program over WGN because a review of UFO events was being made. During the program, a message was broadcast inviting an answer from a spacecraft if they were listening or present, and a 15-second period of silence was allowed for any possible answer that might be forthcoming. During this period, what sounded like an extremely fast code was heard and duly recorded over the Maiers' radio. This was not received by WGN, and only a few people listening in heard it at all, as was reported later." End quote. The article in the prestigious Journal of Spaceflight caught the eye of the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence, which is eager to learn more about the mysterious recording. The CIA contacted other listeners who reported hearing the code, but no other recordings were available, and the Maier sisters became the primary focus of their investigation. After reading the article, the Office of Scientific Intelligence contacted its Scientific Contact Branch to recover the tape. The CIA would later come clean when Gerald K. Haynes, an agency historian, wrote that publication, The CIA's Role in the Study of UFOs. This document provides a chronological examination of the CIA's involvement in UFO investigations, spurred by pressure from ufologists for transparency. And as we know now, the CIA's role in UFO studies began in the late 1940s, coinciding with the Cold War and the first wave of UFO sightings. On June 24, 1947, Kenneth Arnold, a private pilot and reputable businessman, reported seeing 9 disc-shaped objects flying near Mount Rainier, Washington, at speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour. This sighting created the phrase flying saucers and marked the beginning of the modern UFO phenomena and captured public imagination. Given the geopolitical tensions of the time with the Soviet Union, the U.S. government, including the newly formed CIA, feared UFO sightings might be misinterpreted as advanced Soviet technology or other security threats. And so, 2 officers from the Chicago Contact Division, Chief George O. Forrest and Officer Dewelt Walker, met with the sisters to recover the tape. But because the CIA publicly claimed no involvement in the UFO phenomenon beyond their brief role in the 1953 Robertson panel, they couldn't reveal their true affiliation to the Maier sisters. So they did what any good, self-respecting CIA officer would do. They lied. To complete their cover story, Forrest and Walker dressed as Air Force officers, knowing that the Air Force was publicly associated with UFO investigations. We know from multiple stories I've covered here that the CIA had been deeply involved in UFO research. Among the strangest is Senator Russell's 1954 sighting of a UFO in the Soviet Union, an event the CIA covered up after Russell and his companions reported it. So, dressed in their false Air Force identities, Forrest and Walker knocked on the door of the sisters' apartment, and upon entering, the CIA officers later reported that they had stumbled upon, quote, a scene from Arsenic and Old Lace. The only thing lacking was the elderberry wine, end quote. This reference from the CIA report puzzled me at first, but the story is a surprising one. Arsenic and Old Lace is a dark comedy about Mortimer Brewster, who discovers his elderly aunts are serial killers, poisoning lonely men with arsenic-laced wine as an act of charity. Mortimer then grapples with his delusional brother, who buries the victims in the basement, believing he's digging locks for a canal. The play, in its 1944 film adaptation, remained a cultural touchstone even a decade later. There's no indication in the report whether the CIA officers were offered food or drink, but the sisters' welcome was cool but polite. They shared a scrapbook of clippings from their successful stage, musical, and advertising careers, and the officers wisely feigned interest, earning the sisters' trust. Ultimately, the sisters gave Forrest and Walker a copy of the tape, which the officers promptly forwarded to CIA headquarters upon leaving. In his meeting notes, Forrest wrote that he believed the case was not a hoax. Quote, "In all seriousness, we don't think the sisters themselves are trying to fake anything," end quote. He also expressed hope that the Chicago CIA office would be informed if an answer emerged. And now we reach the final source of controversy in the story. The CIA's publication notes state that the CIA, quote, analyzed the tape and found it was nothing more than Morse code from a U.S. radio station, end quote. And as you'll see, this is rather a blithe statement for what would amount to a cover-up lasting a decade. The Maier sisters and their recording might have faded into obscurity had it not been for one man, Dr. Leon Davidson. Dr. Leon Davidson, a chemical engineer at the prestigious Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory, saw UFOs not as alien visitors, but as a sinister terrestrial deception. He believed the CIA under Allen Dulles was orchestrating psychological warfare. Davidson's theory: UFO sightings were fabricated by the U.S. government to manipulate public perception, mislead Cold War adversaries, and secure funding for the space race. Born on October 18th of 1922 in New York, Davidson earned his doctorate in chemical engineering from Columbia University, and his career took him to Los Alamos in 1949, where he worked on cutting-edge projects during the Cold War's tense early years. And it was here that Davidson's fascination with UFOs began, but again, not as a believer in extraterrestrials, but as a skeptic. By the early 50s, he suspected the CIA was exploiting UFO sightings for geopolitical gain. In writings later published, Davidson argued that Dulles used the public's flying saucer obsession to trick the Soviet Union into wasting resources on non-existent alien threats. And drawing on Carl Jung's psychological theories, Dulles also promoted the idea of benign alien visitors, blending real military test flights with staged sightings, landings, and even alleged alien contacts. Davidson's central thesis was chilling. The CIA wasn't hiding aliens on ice, but actively promoting the belief in extraterrestrial cover-ups. He pointed to electronic countermeasures, ECM, a technology used since 1949 to create false radar blips, as a key tool in this deception. By generating anomalous radar signals, the CIA could corroborate eyewitness accounts of strange objects, lending credibility to the UFO myth. Davidson's equation, ECM plus CIA equals UFO, encapsulated his belief that these signals, combined with sightings of experimental aircraft, were being passed off as alien craft to obscure U.S. military capabilities. Two pivotal events solidified Davidson's convictions of this. The first occurred on May 17th of 1950, when he sought access to the Grudge Report, an early UFO government study. Expecting data for his Los Alamos research, Davidson was stunned when the Air Force reclaimed the lab's copy and ceased supporting his inquiries. The report contained intriguing details, including a Rand Corporation letter requesting access to files on the 1947 Maury Island incident, which Davidson later linked to figures in the Kennedy assassination investigation. He also noted that the green fireballs reported in the Southwest, discussed in the Grudge Report, were likely tied to U.S. research, a view shared by astronomer J. Allen Hynek. The second event was the 1952 Washington invasion. Working in Washington at the time, Davidson had gained access to classified photographs of a Navy-guided missile that contradicted Air Force denials of UFO-like technology. He covered suspicious details. Jet interceptors were inexplicably moved from Andrews Air Force Base, just 4 miles from Washington, to Delaware, 90 miles away, during the sightings. This prevented visual confirmation of the objects. Also, Edward Ruppelt, the Air Force's chief UFO investigator at the time, was barred from interviewing witnesses due to a sudden lack of available vehicles and was even denied reimbursement for taxi fares. And most damningly, Ruppelt revealed that a CIA employee had predicted the Washington events days in advance. All of this, for Davidson, was clear evidence of a CIA field evaluation of psychological warfare tactics, a view echoed by UFO researcher Donald Kehoe in his book Flying Saucers, Top Secret. Davidson's suspicions were deepened in November of 1952 when he was invited to the Pentagon to discuss his theory that UFOs, if real, were actually American-made. Presenting a 4-page list of questions to Colonel Adams and Major Fortnett, Davidson found the Air Force's investigation lacking, suggesting it was cover for something else. A private screening of the Tremonton films, UFO footage from 1952, briefly convinced him that saucers might be real, but he later saw this as a part of the deception. In 1953, Davidson wrote to the Secretary of Defense, warning that the Air Force's dismissal of UFO sightings could allow enemies to infiltrate U.S. airspace by disguising missiles as UFOs with flashing lights. His arguments may have influenced the Air Force's 1954 policy shift, which took UFOs more seriously and stopped denying they might be American devices. But Davidson's most enduring contribution to UFO research is his analysis of Project Blue Book Special Report 14, which was prepared in 1952 for the CIA's Robertson panel. The panel's report, kept secret until 1958, was designed to assess public reactions to UFO sightings for potential psychological warfare applications. When the report was leaked to Kehoe for a CBS interview, Davidson and Kehoe pressed the CIA for answers. While Kehoe was treated with respect, Davidson faced hostility. CIA officer Frank Chapin suggested Davidson had ulterior motives, even proposing an FBI investigation. But undeterred, Davidson published the report and his analysis in 5 editions. Though legendary in UFO circles, his work remains confidential. Davidson traced the UFO myth to a broader CIA campaign under Agency Chief Dulles, who he believes sponsored saucer clubs, publishers, and contactee stories to amplify the phenomenon's psychological impact. He pointed to George Adamski, a famous 1950s contactee who claimed to have met Vesuvians, as a government pawn. Adamski's encounters, Davidson argued, were staged at Camp Irwin, California, using film, technology, and drugs, with military personnel orchestrating his alien meetings. A 1952 Life magazine article, Have We Visitors from Space?, was prepared with government assistance, further embedding the UFO myth in popular culture. Davidson also scrutinized UFO abduction phenomena, drawing parallels between the 1961 Betty Hill case, which we've covered here, and the story of Candy Jones, a CIA courier subjected to hypnosis experiments. Both involved strange sounds and men playing doctor, leading Davidson to suspect CIA involvement in abduction narratives. And this is where Dr. Davidson connects with the story of Marie and Mildred Maier. In 1957, 3 years after their recording, Davidson stumbled on the story of the Maier recording and reached out to the Maier sisters. Marie and Mildred had shared their experience, revealing that they had given the recording to the Air Force for analysis, but had never heard back. Intrigued, Davidson wrote to Walker, believing him to be a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to ask whether the tape had been analyzed by the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC. Walker's reply was vague and evasive, raising Davidson's suspicions that Walker was actually a CIA agent. And determined to uncover the truth, Davidson escalated his inquiry by writing directly to CIA Director Allen Dulles. He demanded to know what the coded message revealed and who Walker really was. The CIA, eager to protect Walker's true identity as one of their own, responded that another government agency had analyzed the tape and that the Air Force would follow up with Davidson. On August 5th, the Air Force wrote to him, claiming that Walker was and is an Air Force officer and that the tape was, quote, analyzed by another government organization, end quote. They confirmed it contained only identifiable Morse code from a known U.S. licensed radio station. Unsatisfied with the response, Davidson wrote to Dulles again, this time demanding the identity of the Morse operator and the analyzing agency. Both the CIA and the Air Force were now cornered. Each had previously denied analyzing the tape, and the Air Force had falsely claimed Walker as their own. Desperate to maintain the deception, the CIA opted for an audacious ruse. They dressed the officers in Air Force uniforms and sent them to meet Davidson in New York City. The CIA officer, dressed in an Air Force costume, insisted there was no shadowy super agency involved and that Air Force policy prohibited disclosing operational details. Davidson pressed for the message's content and origin. The officer promised to investigate, but later called Davidson to report that since the signal was of known U.S. origin, the tape and related notes had been destroyed to save file space. When Congressman Joseph Carth intervened, forwarding a letter about Davidson's claims of CIA deception, the agency then doubled down further. They told Carth that aside from a brief role with the Robertson panel, the, quote, CIA had not participated in any flying saucer activities and had referred all correspondence to the Air Force, end quote. They dismissed Davidson's accusations, stating, quote, Mr. Davidson's belief that this agency is involved in the flying saucer fervor and is using this as a tool in psychological warfare is entirely unfounded." End quote. Unfazed by the denial, Davidson accused the CIA of destroying evidence, boldly telling the officer, quote, he and his agency, whatever it was, were acting like Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamster Union in destroying records which might indict them. End quote. Now, fearing further scrutiny, the CIA's Contact Division decided to sever ties completely, reporting to the Director of Central Intelligence and ATIC that they would no longer engage with Davidson. Years later, CIA historian Gerald K. Haynes reported the incident in his report on the CIA's involvement in UFO incidents from 1947 to 1990. He described it in the report as, quote, a minor, rather bizarre incident handled poorly by both the CIA and the Air Force, which added fuel to the growing mystery surrounding UFOs and the CIA's role in their investigation, end quote. Though Haynes downplayed its significance, he inadvertently confirmed Davidson's suspicions. The CIA was absolutely entangled in UFO matters despite their official denials at the time. Davidson concluded that the CIA was the mastermind behind the UFO phenomenon, fabricating major reports to mask experimental aircraft tests or conduct psychological warfare on American citizens. His theory challenged the popular belief that UFOs were extraterrestrial and that the government was hiding alien evidence. He asserted that the CIA was solely responsible for creating the flying saucer fervor as a tool for Cold War psychological research. The CIA's strategy seemed to be this: keep lying until you get it right. And strangely, this approach of simply ignoring Davidson worked. Eventually, Davidson appeared to abandon the case, and the tape from outer space faded into obscurity, at least until '97, when the CIA revisited the story. And the story concludes in this way. In 1968, the sisters moved into a big house on Miami Beach. Mildred thrived as a real estate agent, while Marie became an optician, although she never left her advertising roots. Marie passed away in '92 and Mildred in '97. And both were laid to rest in their hometown in Baldwin County, Alabama, and Leon Davidson departed this world in 2007. Today, the Maier sisters and Davidson are gone, but their tale lingers, a whisper from the unknown. Could it have been aliens, or was it simply a government lie that was too clever to unravel? But one thing's for certain, the truth remains just out of reach. And there is one lesson: expect the government to lie about matters both great and small, and then act accordingly. This is My Dark Path, and I'm MF Thomas. Thank you, dear friends, for walking the dark paths of the world with me. Until next time, good night.